Well, Peter Snow is one of Britain's most distinguished television journalists, ITN correspondent, presenter of Newsnight for the BBC, a specialist, how could we forget, in general election results analysis, any number of radio appearances, and of course, a whole series of books on historical subjects. And Peter, we're going to be talking about interviewing technique. And I'm wondering if we go back to your sort of education and upbringing, was there anything in it that prepared you for a profession in which you would be asking lots of questions?
I suppose yes. I suppose yes and no, to be honest. I never kept a diary. I didn't write anything particularly for pleasure or for serious analysis. But I was very keen on ancient history. History is my subject. And ancient history is all about digging out facts. And you don't dig out facts unless you're bonkers, unless you're very curious about what the answer to those fact questions is. So I had great fun at school and university. I also read ancient Greek, which is desperately demanding for those who need to understand and are curious about facts, how to spell things and what the letters mean and so on. So I was very much involved in my education in digging, and I was very curious. I loved learning things. I like the word knowledge much more than opinion, for example. I don't like the word opinion at all, actually, except in the case of Trump. But no, I had great fun at school and university in digging into sources, information, facts, quotes, quotations, people, what people thought and did, and all that kind of stuff. That helped a lot.
But you've still got to learn what is the right sort of question for the right sort of subject matter.
Yes, you have, and that's practice. That is all practice. I never got any training from the year dot to the year to my present 86th year, 87th year. I had never had any training whatever about anything. I simply learned on the go.
But what was that? Was that typical of a radio or television journalist? Typical that you got no training?
I think so. I think a lot of people went along, which I would recommend, by the way, if I was talking to young students, which I think you are, about how to get into journalism. And I think you just simply you persuade the newspaper, local newspaper, or the BBC or ITV, ITN, and you persuade them that you're a good guy and a curious person who will want lots of information by talking to them, possibly by sort of producing a diary or an essay or something you've written about something. But on the whole, I think just by saying I'm an interested guy, I'm a curious, enthusiastic chap, and that I think is what gets you there, rather than I've written an essay on Louis the 14th.
But I mean, some people might find it strange that you say that there should be no training when you think that interviews are the very stuff of radio, so much radio and television. How come no training?
Because the interviewing is a very natural thing for some people to do. You're doing it now. It comes to you quite naturally. Nobody trained you to talk to me, correct?
I'm saying nothing, Peter.
I'm not interviewing you. I thought I was. Okay, well, I mean, there you are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. Uh, I mean, people are trained. There are people, of course, there are people who go to BBC training sessions and goodness knows what. I never did. I was never asked to go. I never did. Um, these things just happen. And I think probably, I don't want to be conceited or something ludicrous like that, but I think probably the people realize after a few questions are asked, when they popped you on and tried you out, this guy can ask questions, doesn't really need training, or let's think of him for a training course later.
Yeah, but the natural next question would then be, as you look around the range of interviewing that you see and hear on radio and television, do you think the overall standard is good, bad, indifferent?
Good.
And on what basis would you say that then?
Because the people who do the interviewing, I mean, frankly, I can't really think of any exceptions. I really can't. I mean, possibly Nigel Farage banging away on his GBTV. But I can't really think of anybody who's got where they've got on the BBC, certainly. Times Radio I listen to less. I can't think of anyone who's there interviewing on the BBC. who does it badly. It's good. It's good. And they've arrived because they persuaded the BBC they can do it.
Yeah. So there you are. You managed to convince people that you're worthy of a job at ITN. But what were there? Can you remember any sort of painful learning experiences where the hard experience of asking good questions, was something front and center?
Of course, all the time. I mean, all the interviews you did. Some interviews you got no answers at all. But every interview I did, I tried to get something out of the bloke or the woman, whatever it was. And sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. But you go on asking the questions that you think, as dear old Robin Day said once, that you think of yourself as the man on the top of the Clapham omnibus, asking questions he or she would like the answer to. It's as simple as that, Andrew.
Yeah, yeah, but one of the things that follows on from that, man on the top of the Clapham omnibus is asking very, very basic, simple questions, and it is a temptation, is it not, for interviewers on the radio and television to ask questions in such a way that sort of reflects on them rather than the simplicity of the question.
Well, sorry, you're jumping a further hurdle when you talk about reflect back on them. I mean, sometimes at the moment, but what I should have said earlier, just now, is there's another thing you need to be full of, and that is research. In other words, if I'm sitting on the top of Clapham omnibus and I'm about to interview Andrew Green or about to interview Keir Starmer, I will do my homework very carefully and do my research before I ask him a single question, so that I can anticipate somebody's answers, and I can say, "Well, hang on, surely you said this," or "What about the GDP of per person?" and whatever the thing. I need to know very widely what the subject matter is all about that I'm asking about. So the Clapham omnibus is a nice expression, but it doesn't, of course, account for the homework you need. Now, sorry, you mentioned reflecting on me. Oh, if you mean by that, how far is the interviewer showing off? How far is the interviewer demonstrating his or her qualities of brilliance? But the answer is it shouldn't be there at all. As long as, I mean, the brilliance is in simply getting out of the interviewee the information that you think the Clapham omnibus viewer would like to have. So it's not about me; it's about you. It's
Yeah.
about the person you're interviewing.
Well, sometimes it's the long.
Sorry.
Sometimes, Peter, it's the long, convoluted question which says too much about the interviewer.
Yeah, yes and no. Of course, you're quite right. The convoluted question showing off that you know all about it, all about what the bloke's about to say. Of course. On the other hand, the long question sometimes contains a bit of fact that you want to challenge the chap about. He might have said something, or he or she might have said something, and you might want to say, "Well, hang on, surely this happened like this, not like you say." So yes, you're right. Of course, too long questions are ridiculous, and also, I mean, Jeremy Paxman, you'll get a no doubt ask about old Jeremy, who's a great mate. And Jeremy scored massively on It's All About Me, as well as to be fair, because Jeremy wouldn't have been on the BBC for 5 minutes if he hadn't, as well as getting stuff out of the guy, or at the very least embarrassing the guy about not being able to answer a question. The famous Michael Howard interview, which he won't go into, but I'm sure you know about that.
He asked the same question 14 times. I wonder if that wasn't though a failure of interviewing technique to resort to asking the same question 14 times.
Well, it was a failure on the part of Michael Howard. No, Michael Howard wouldn't answer the question. What Paxman was doing was not failing to answer a different question or get a different answer, but he was exposing the fact that Michael Howard didn't want to answer a very embarrassing question about this prison governor. And so I think that was legitimate. On the other hand, I think that Paxo's general, I mean, the expressions on Paxo's face when someone said something he didn't agree with were a little bit naughty. I mean, it's all good fun. I mean, I'm a great admirer of Jeremy. He was the absolute box office to watch.
Yeah.
But if you ask me which interviewers I most admire, I mean, we'll talk about it if we want to. But I mean, people like dear old David Frost. See, David Frost wanted the person to enjoy the interview. He wanted the person to cough up information, sometimes as a result of David Frost's charming questioning technique. And that was very successful, very successful. I'd like to almost to say perhaps more successful than Robin Day or Jeremy.
Well, it's a wrong way of thinking that you necessarily get the answers you want by aggressive questioning?
Yeah, but it is indeed. No, you don't necessarily. Correct. I mean, no. I mean, what you don't want to do is to make the interviewee resentful of the way you're asking them questions. That's all that gets is either a blank or don't be silly, I can't answer that, or no comment, or I mean, it doesn't work.
So, you mentioned the amount of research that you would do if, say, you were interviewing Keir Starmer. Does that mean, well, what is the balance between having a list of questions that reflects that research and yet flying on the seat of your pants, doing it on the spur of the moment, asking questions on the spur of the moment?
Well, fairly simply, you do indeed scribble down a few loads of questions. Vital. I mean, I must ask about that time when he was beating his wife, or I must ask him about what he meant by Ukraine or whatever it is. At the same time, you are flying by the seat of your pants because what he answers, you have to pick up. So it's no good having a list of questions, which some of the young, not young or old, I mean, some of the less experienced interviewers you'll see them will sit there like this, and they will read a lot of questions out. That's obviously no good. You need to be able to pick up his answer, his or her answer, and say, oh, I see. So you don't mean this, you mean that, or something like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you can have problems with people who just don't really give you the answers you're after. I mean, what are the ways of teasing out of people information when they may not actually be terribly good at delivering answers? Is there anything you can do in that situation?
Oh, you're helpful. I mean, the fatal great thing is to be helpful. It was when someone, and you do get this a lot, of course, with non-political interviewees, you get frequently people who get a bit embarrassed about what happened, or a bit emotional about the death of someone or something like that. And in that situation, you have to encourage them and say, oh, don't be upset, and please don't answer if you'd rather not, and all that kind of thing. So I think you tease it out of people. And so friendliness and not charm necessarily, although Frosty I think was a charming chap. I think you must be ready to help them along, and to say, could it have been that maybe you went this way rather than that way?
Yeah. But the opposite problem is somebody who delivers long, convoluted answers where you're not quite sure where they're going, but it might be going somewhere that you want. I mean, how would you normally cope with that? And I suppose it's politicians in particular one thinks of, but not necessarily just politicians.
There are two types of interview. I mean, what's the word? Techniques, two styles of interview. Not styles, not smart. No, two interview characters. One is one like you're doing with me now, a recorded one, where you record for 40 minutes and you use 5. If it's your choice which 5 minutes you use, that's one way. The other way is you have 5 to 8 in the morning, 8 o'clock is the news. You've got 5 minutes to do a live interview with Starmer. Now, Starmer, the answer to the first question is, well, it's a difficult story, this, and I'll tell you, I've got 5 points to make. One, you say, Prime Minister, with great respect, we haven't got time for that. You've only got 5 minutes. I want you to answer the key question. What are you going to do about Ukraine? And that's the only thing you can do. So, but as I say, you might let him make his 5 points in your 40-minute job, so that you can cut out all 4 or 5 of them. Of course, you make clear that you will be editing before you do the interview, to be fair. But in a live interview, which is probably about maximum 4 minutes, you will interrupt.
Yeah.
Interrupt.
Anybody that does interviewing for a living is bound to come out of certain interviews feeling embarrassed that you just didn't do the job properly. Not trying to embarrass you at all, Peter, but can we learn from experiences that you had with very particular interviewees where you on reflection you thought, no, I just got it wrong?
Well, probably quite a few. I mean, I've had two. They're more interview disasters than simply didn't get enough out of the person. I mean, which I will tell you about if you're interested. It's quite amusing, really. First silly one is Barbara Streisand. Barbara Streisand turned up at London Airport a long time ago, just after Funny Girl. She'd done Funny Girl, and I was passing the airport, and I was told, "Can you go and interview Barbara Streisand? Quickly, turn right, go down to the airport." So I said, "Barbara Streisand, okay." So I went to the airport, sat down. There she said, "Hello." I said, "Hello," and I said, "Well, now, Miss Streisand, this is very exciting to meet you. What sort of stuff are you doing at the moment?" She said, "I'm sorry, just repeat that question." So I said, "Well, what are you starring in, and what have you done, and tell us about your latest." She said, "Do you mean to say you don't know what I've just made, the film I just made?" I said, "Tell me all about it." She said, "Goodbye." She got up and walked out. So that was embarrassing. And again, there is the perfect example of me going to do an interview, which I had no right to do, without doing any homework at all. None. I didn't know what Funny Girl was. The other terrible example, which was a more serious one than that, was Arthur Scargill back in 1964 or 5. No, sorry, much later than that, in the 90s or 80s, when he went to Moscow and met Brezhnev. And in his speech in Moscow, I read on Reuters copy, he had said that Brezhnev was a real leader of his people compared to Margaret Thatcher. So when Scargill got back, which of course is outrageous, so I'm not sure that I may believe that. So he came back, and we got him in the studio live, and I said to him, "Mr. Scargill, it was a bit rich, wasn't it, saying that you preferred Brezhnev's style of leadership to Thatcher's? She's, after all, your prime minister, and blah, 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 democracy and so on." And he said, "Yes, Mr. Sloan, that's a good question. I'll tell you all about the answer. Have you read the speech?" So I said, "Yeah, of course I have." And tell me about Brezhnev. He said, "Yes. No, I just want to make sure you weren't quite so. That doesn't sound a very clear answer. You have read the speech, the whole speech, so you know what I said all the way through." So I said, yes, I have. Yes, I'm back to Brezhnev. He said, "No, Mr. Snow, I just want to make sure that you've read the whole speech from beginning to end. Can you say yes or no to that specific question?" So I once again tried the Brezhnev on him. And then he asked it again, and I said, "I haven't read the speech." I said, "No, to be honest with you, I haven't read the speech. I've simply read extracts," which should have really, to be honest, been enough. But I was destroyed from then on. The editor was very kind afterwards. He then answered the question. It was sort of vaguely banging on about Brezhnev being a sort of long-established chap. And the editor was very nice afterwards. A very good interview, very interesting. Well done, well done. But he must have known it was a disaster. So that was bad news. I just thinking of any other examples of.
Well, I mean, I should allow you though, Peter. So many successful interviews in your career, but I'm just wondering if there is any standout or a couple of really standout interviews where you thought, yes, it was a crucial interview and I actually delivered on it.
Oh, well, I mean, two examples. One, Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, who was a genius. I mean, he was a marvelous chap. Should have led a country 6 times bigger than it was. But you could sit down with Lee Kuan Yew and you could say, "What do you think about China? What do you think about America?" And he would give you fascinating, thoughtful, serious answers without worrying about the consequences, because there weren't any consequences for him. He was king of Singapore. He was king of really intellectually powerful people. And he was a really wonderful chap to talk to. So Lee Kuan Yew, yes, great stuff. My best example of interviews that I'm rather proud of, well, after the Berlin Wall, the day after the Berlin Wall came down, I covered that. It was the most exciting moment, terribly dramatic moment. Down came the wall, and I was determined to get good interviewees. So I rang Dennis Healy, And I rang Ted Heath and said, could you come to Berlin now and stand on the wall with me tomorrow afternoon? It was no, late this evening. It was early morning because the wall had come down that night. And they had all day to get there. And they both said yes. And they turned up side by side on the Berlin Wall. And Heath just before the crucial moment, news at 10, no, Newsnight coming up at 10:30 or it was, quite long late in the evening. And uh, just before it, about 10:15, Ted Heath said, oh, I've got to have a pee. So I said, what? I mean, look, hang on, we can't lose you. He said, I'll be back. So the guy disappeared. And we had to send two producers knocking on all the gentlemen's toilet doors. He finally, literally 1 minute before 10, he turned up and he stood there and gave the most brilliant answer. So the question, what's the meaning of this? What's it mean for the future? Blah, blah, blah. And Dennis Healy, too, was absolutely magnificent. Both of them terrifically, they were great statesmen, the two of them, in spite of all their failures. And so that was good. Lee Kuan Yew, Ted Heath, Thatcher. I mean, you want a good person to interview, a person who will answer your questions. It's Margaret Thatcher.
But she would expect excellence from you in return, wouldn't she?
Well, she'd expect you to be sensible and ask straight questions and know what you're talking about. Yes, of course. But yeah. I mean, she didn't muck about. A lot of politicians who don't want to dodge, she never dodged an answer. This may be unpopular, but I'm doing it. Poll tax. It may be unpopular, I'm doing it. Inflation is too high. We're going to bring it down, and that's going to cost you people in the country. It's going to be difficult.
Well, yeah. Well, Peter, you've gravitated towards politics during the course of this interview, and without over dramatizing things, political turbulence around the world, all sorts of uncertainties. And I wonder if in any way you fear that the art of interviewing will shrivel up under the pressures that journalists, producers may well be under in a whole range of countries going forward.
Well, yes, in Russia, of course. In England, no. In America, no.
Do you think in America, no? You're happy with that things will continue?
I mean, Fox News, right? Pro-Trump and all this stuff, and slanted and biased. CNN and the others will I think will thrive. I think the more mistakes Trump makes, the more the counter Trump interviewer will, or at least the straight objective interviewer will prosper, because people will say this is madness. It's all bonkers. And Americans, it's a free country. We live in a free country. They do. I think they also do, frankly, in France and Germany, although they have this mad obsession with AFD and with the far right in France. I think that these countries, these Western European countries, Sweden, Finland, were wonderful new admissions to NATO, terrifically exciting. I think the prospects for interviewing are good. If you're asking about the prospects of world peace and God knows what, I mean, all that's horrible, terrible, but frightening. But never mind that. You're not allowed to interview a politician.
Well, look, Peter, that's been enormous fun. Thank you very much for so many thoughts which have really brought alive the art of interviewing for us. Thank you so much indeed for your time. We really much appreciate it.
Great fun, Andrew. Lovely to see you again, old thing. Great fun. A young thing, excuse me. God, you can't be more than 50. Good luck.
I'm saying nothing.